All right, well, welcome everyone to another night of Mom's Night Out on Zoom. Elizabeth Foss and I are so excited that you're here. And if this is your first time joining one of our super professional Mom's Night Out Zoom calls, my name is Stephanie Weinert. I'm a homeschool mom from Charlotte, North Carolina. I have 5 children, ages 9 years old to just turned 5 months this week. This is Beckett, my little co-host here. And Elizabeth is the mother of 9 from up in Virginia. Elizabeth, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yep. Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I have 9 children. Most of them are not even children anymore. My oldest is 31 and my youngest is 11. Currently, we have 6 under our roof right now. Our 11-year-old up to a 23-year-old. So that's the whole gang.
Yes, it is. And our special guest tonight is Sarah Mackenzie. She's the author of the book Teaching from Rest, A Homeschooler's Guide to Unshakable Peace, and the Read-Aloud family, which is what we're going to be talking tonight. She's also the founder of Read-Aloud Revival. Many of you know her blog and her podcast. And Sarah, I'm going to try not to fangirl too much on you, and I'm going to try not to start crying and telling you how much Teaching from Rest changed my life and our entire homeschool. I read it every April, Sarah, because it's around April that I start to freak out about next year or end of the year testing. And my 2 best girlfriends say, it's time to read Teaching from Rest again and just calm down. But welcome, Sarah. We're so glad you're here. Can you tell us just a little bit about where you're from and your family?
Yes, and I didn't realize you have a Beckett, Stephanie. I have a Beckett as well, so.
It's a great name.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I live in the Northwest. My husband and I have 6 kids. Our oldest is 18. She is a senior. Can you believe that, Elizabeth? She's a senior this year.
Blows my mind.
I know.
Blows my mind.
And our youngest are 6.5-year-old twins who keep us hopping pretty.
That blows
busy.
my mind. That they're 6.5, that is crazy to me.
It doesn't feel like it's gone as fast for me as it might feel like it's gone for you.
I'm sure.
Yeah, we've been homeschooling since the beginning. Actually, that is how I met Elizabeth, because her book, Real Learning, was one of the very first books I ever read on homeschooling. And her blog and writing was massively formative to our own homeschool. So,
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But Sarah and I can count ourselves as in real life friends, because she made a trip from all the way on the West Coast, all the way out here 1 year, way before the last 3 children, and came to my house. So we actually did get to meet and talk in person. So I count her.
Yeah, and a little tiny side story is that we had 3 kids, and I really, really longed for another baby, and Elizabeth told me to pray the St. Andrew Novena. And then I had 3 babies in after that, and I told Elizabeth, stop praying novena for me, no more.
I still have a screenshot of the funniest text from Sarah after she went for a sonogram when she was pregnant. Not the first baby after we started praying the novena, but the second baby after. And it says, "It's raining babies. Oh my gosh, it's twins." Okay.
Aww. That's awesome. Well, Sarah, tell us a little bit about how you came to found Read-Aloud Revival, because I know that there's a lot of mamas on here who've been deeply impacted by your podcast and your blog and your monthly book list. And how did you first get into Read-Aloud Revival? What happened in your own life and your own family that brought it about?
Well, I was reading aloud a lot to my kids my oldest kids when they were younger, but about the time that those 3 oldest ones were maybe 8, 6, and 4 or thereabouts, I heard Andrew Pudewa from the Institute for Excellence in Writing talk about how to help your kids become really good communicators, how to help them become good speakers and good writers. And I listened to a talk that he gave where he said there's 2 of the most important things. One is to have them memorize poetry. The other is to read aloud. He said, you cannot read aloud enough. And we were reading aloud, but I got really inspired because I don't know how many people here love Andrew Pudewa, but I love Andrew Pudewa. He's so inspiring. I just thought, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go on. And all the things that he said would happen, like their improved writing and vocabulary and comprehension and all those things happened, and their, you know, enjoyment of stories. But then there were some things happening that I didn't anticipate, like the connections between the kids, you know, like their bond over the stories. We kind of had like an inside language, you know, around the dinner table. We would like make jokes about it, kind of like you do when you see a movie and somebody quotes it, you know, everybody laughs. So that kind of just turned up the relationships in our house. And I was reading aloud a ton. So then fast forward a few years, and I got the idea to start the podcast when the twins were a few months old, like you do, because you're tired of changing diapers or something. I don't really know. I thought I would just do a couple of episodes talking about how reading aloud had transformed our homeschool and our family life. And I thought, well, it would be really fun to have Andrew Pudawa on, but I didn't think that would be possible because he was like Andrew Pudawa, and I didn't have a podcast, so I didn't know how that was going to get started. So I ended up just really on a whim shooting an email off to his team and asked if he might come talk to me on my podcast, and he said yes. So then I decided I needed to figure out how to start a podcast, and it sort of just took off on its own. It really, I think what happens is that we're all moms, we really, really want to have good relationships with our kids. I mean, that's the heart of it, right? We want those warm, beautiful connections with our kids. And I think when we realize how simple opening a book and reading the words off, how powerful that simple act is, that it doesn't cost anything, it takes like 10 or 15 minutes, and it is so powerful, we get a little crazy for it, we get a little excited about it. And I think that's what happened. I talked about it on the podcast, and everybody was having the same experience at home, and so it just sort of took on a life of its own from there.
So how do people get started with reading aloud to their kids? Because I know we have quite a few wonderful questions that have come in before we started tonight. And the heart of a lot of the questions that were coming in, even right before we went on here, were from moms who were like, okay, well, I've got kids of all ages. I didn't start when all my kids were babies. Just how do we begin, and how, you know, where does a mom start who has not kind of, when the kids haven't grown up with the practice of reading aloud, and mom just feels like, what do we do?
So I think it depends on how old your kids are and how big of a spread you're talking about. But one of the things that I think has been really helpful at my house is to read toward the middle of like age group, especially if you have a wide age range. One of the things I've heard some people suggest is to always read above your kids' reading level. And that will work for your oldest couple, and then all of your youngest ones also, who happen to probably be the ones who are wreaking havoc on your entire house. Like they're completely not engaged. So I have had a lot of success reading toward the middle. So for example, my older kids were, you know, if they were 10, 8, and 6, I would kind of pick something toward the 8-year-old, and the 10-year-old would also be interested, and the 6-year-old wouldn't be left out. Does that make sense? Yeah. Also, I wouldn't try to read one book that's going to appeal to the whole gamut if you have a really wide age range. So I read to my older kids and I read to my younger kids. And occasionally there have been a few that I've read to, we can talk about those too, because there's a few books that are really especially good for a big wide age range. But for the most part, I think you want your kids to love listening to read aloud. You want it to be easy for you to read and for them to listen. And so to do that, you may want to get just grouping your kids into like olders and youngers might really help. Okay. And another thing that I think that's really easy, or another thing to keep in mind, is that there's nothing that a novel or a chapter book can give you or your kids that a picture book can't. Right. So a lot of times we feel like we need to move up into longer books, and there's not really anything that you're gaining there that you can't get in picture books. In fact, what we know is that with picture books, because the publishers are expecting picture books to be read aloud from an adult to a younger child, there are no limits on, syntax or language complexity or anything. So what we see is when you go from a picture book to a novel like Ramona Quimby or something like that, you actually see that the complexity of the language and the vocabulary goes down rather than going up. And that's because the publishers are expecting kids to be reading Ramona to themselves for the most part. Mm-hmm. They're not publishing it for a read aloud purpose. That's why they all have, grade, suggested reading levels and things like that. So it's helpful to remember that if you are short on time, if you have 100 kids, if you have kids that are not used to listening to stories for a long time, just stick with picture books. They are rich, beautiful language. They are whole story structure. That whole arc is right there in a picture book. And they are a very small commitment because you can usually read them in about 15 minutes, which is a lot more doable for most of us than committing to reading like The Hobbit or something.
Right, right. Now, what about for families? Sarah, you seem to have a natural love for books. I know, Elizabeth, you have a love for books. I have a love for books, but not every woman does. And some women find themselves at home during this season of self-isolation with all their children and would like to have some new traditions or some new habits of reading, but it's not part of their family culture or it's not part of their own love language. Where should a mom start who just does not have that relationship with books or that natural affinity? Where should she even start with your books or your website?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is if she doesn't, it's been a while since she's loved a book. Maybe she loved books when she was younger. I would read something aloud, something that you loved when you were younger, even if it's not the best literature. We do, and a lot of us do have this tendency. We want our kids to like love The Wind in the Willows because we think they're supposed to love The Wind in the Willows, even if The Wind in the Willows is kind of boring, right? We want them to like love all this classic, beautiful literature, but the stuff that we read when we were kids might not, when we were kids, might not be that great. That's certainly not the case for me. I was reading Babysitter's Club like crazy when I was a kid. But if you can read something aloud to your kids that you loved as a child, that enthusiasm will probably bubble over. So I wouldn't get too hung up on reading the right books. I would just find something that's fun for you. The other thing is, if you don't like reading aloud, then let an audiobook do it for you, because audiobook narrators do a really beautiful job of reading a book well and letting you just relax. Then you can do whatever you want to do: sketch, knit, wash the dishes, do the laundry. I've been working on puzzles with my kids while we've been listening to an audiobook lately, and then it kind of feels like a treat for you too. So, and you don't feel like it's such a what's the word, like an investment of energy,
Right.
to get started. If you're not a book lover, you don't know where to start, on my website, one of the newest things we did is we created a quiz. So you answer these 3 quick questions, and it's how old are the kids you're reading to? And then what kind, are you looking for magic? Are you looking for a classic? Are you looking for history or something contemporary? And then the third question is just, do you want something short or long? And then you submit those, and then I give you 2 of my favorite book recommendations that fit all those things. And so that would be where I would start, because it'll give you just 2 books to start with. You don't really need a whole list. And sometimes book lists can be a little overwhelming. Yeah. Because they are like, there's 50 books. So you're thinking, okay, now I'm 50 books behind, but not really. You can only read one at a time. So you just need to pick one.
Right. I love that. Your advice to do Audible or audiobooks was epic for me, because I felt like, at least starting out early in motherhood, that I had to read it all myself. And I remember in your book, you talked about you didn't have to read Little House on the Prairie, the whole thing aloud yourself. And I was like, this is like epic. And then sometimes we love, there's a recording of James Herriot's books with, it's all with a,
yeah, we got that one too.
Yes, with his British accent, and I love listening to it. I mean, I could never read James Herriot that way because I can't do the British accent. And it's so rich, and my kids can now do the British accent because we've listened to it so much. And I just love that we don't have to, as moms, bear that whole load with, while still enjoying all this beautiful literature. And
well, it is kind of funny. I would think we do this to ourselves, right? Where we sort of think if something's too easy, it must not really count, kind of, right?
Yes.
So like if I can turn on an audiobook and sit there and do something I really enjoy, and it doesn't feel like it's difficult, then it can't really count. But when we're thinking about read aloud, the biggest benefits are the language being spoken out loud and then going in through your child's ear. So we know that there are academic benefits that come from language being read aloud, better than even words read off the page with your eyes. So there's that benefit. The other benefit, which is more compelling to me personally, is the relationships, the connection of just sharing a story together. Well, that happens. You're still sharing the story if someone's reading it to you, or if you're doing the actual reading, right? I have heard a few people say, well, there's a lot of benefit from kids hearing the story from their mom's voice, but I don't know. I think my kids get enough of my voice.
My voice. we do a lot of audiobooks. Like, I would say that beyond the picture book stage, audiobooks are the primary way that we read aloud. And honestly, I do a lot of like audiobooks personally, just for myself, just, you know, where I'm listening to a book. I like audio. I like being able to fold laundry, or if I have a major cleaning project, that's how I motivate myself. But when all my kids were home, and all my older boys all played soccer at ridiculously high levels a lot. So we did a lot of driving to soccer with small kids, other kids in the car, all of us all together. And that was our read aloud time. And I wasn't reading, I was driving. But they learned to love their favorite narrators. You know, they had their favorites that they would listen to them read a grocery list if that meant they could listen to them. And we shared a lot of books over a lot of years of driving back and forth to soccer practice, or or family trips. You know, they'll remember a family trip by, oh, remember that time we went to Florida and we listened to all the Anna Green Gables books all the way down and all the way back, you know, and that'll be the marker, not when I was 7, but you know, the Anna Green Gables time we went to visit grandma. So I think audiobooks, it's not cheating, and it's such a great resource, such a really good way to stretch your ability to bring something to your kids. And you know, now that once upon a time we were listening to audiobooks on actual tape in the actual cassette player in the car, but you know, now not only Audible's great, but also you can rent an audiobook from the library, and this is such a low cost way to get some quality voices reading quality books to kids. So I don't think it's cheating at all.
Yeah.
And even like if your library's closed right now, my library's still, the digital stuff I can still get, the
Right.
ebooks and the audiobooks on my Libby app. I don't know if your libraries have the Libby app or Overdrive, but
Overdrive is what we've been using.
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Sarah, can you talk a little bit about the family habit that needs to be built of reading aloud? Because I think some moms start reading aloud, and I remember the story, I can't remember which of your books it's in, where you talk about putting the blanket down outside, getting the popsicles, like you were like, we are going to read aloud and we're going to have this family time, but everyone's fighting and you're just like at the end like, this is just great. And I've had that experience. My kids are all very close in age, and I've had that experience many times. And I think sometimes if we start out and it doesn't go so well, we might get discouraged, or it might fizzle out before we have the time as a family to learn the habit. So can you just speak a little bit about the patience everybody needs in kind of developing this habit?
Yeah, 2 things come to mind right away. One is that I think we need to manage our expectations. It's not usually that read aloud itself is going horribly, except that we have this, like in my head, I have this vision of myself sitting on like the couch or right in front of the fire or something, and my children scattered around me, like listening attentively while I read to them from some classic. And that is never what it looks like, right? And I think it's the expectations that we have that everyone's going to enjoy this. Everyone's going to listen the whole time. They're not going to fight. They're going to, you know, not going to talk. I mean, that's probably my own pet peeve, is when my kids start talking to each other while I'm reading. I'm like, hello, I'm reading over here. It just happened this morning. A lot of times if I just stop reading, I don't have to say anything. I just kind of stop reading and wait for a second, and they're like, oh, sorry. Yeah, right. Go back to where you were, you know, and you can keep going. But a lot of it's about managing expectations. It's not going to look like it does on Instagram. Like, really, I should probably do a read aloud on Instagram soon and see just how like much noise and chaos there is. Cause I think it's our expectation that things are happening perfectly, and they don't. Your kids can miss things. They can like miss entire parts of the story and pick it up later, and it's fine. So I think we have this idea that if they miss a line or miss a paragraph, they're going to be lost, but that's not usually how it works. So just kind of managing the expectations. It can look a little messy and crazy. And then I also think the other thing is, if you're having a hard time it's like any habit, it's like getting started is the hardest part, right? So a couple things that can help with that is, one is to, whatever you're reading aloud, to stick it out where you see it. You know, I like to put books in baskets and things, but then they're kind of tucked away, out of sight, out of mind. But if it's on the kitchen counter and I walk by that kitchen counter 450 times a day, I'll see it and it'll remind me that I wanted to read aloud. And the other thing is, if you can, pegging it or pairing a read aloud with a meal time can help, because you're feeding your kids every day, right? So if it's like snack time or breakfast is a really good time to do it. To say we're going to read aloud during breakfast, because everyone shows up for, my kids don't all show up for breakfast at the same time. So you kind of have to make it work for your family, right? The only thing I'll say about reading at meal times is that can be a really frustrating suggestion if you have toddlers. So just know, again, we're managing expectations. That's not realistic to expect them to listen quietly while, there's a toddler at the table. It's just never peaceful enough. I think so much of it has to do with understanding that there's a lot to be gained, even if it looks messy, even if a kid says, I hate this story, even if, they're always fighting over the Legos or, whatever, while you're reading to them, they're getting and benefiting so much from the memory of you reading aloud to them, even if they don't remember the exact book or the exact story or don't pick up on everything. There's just a lot of benefits that are sort of like sliding in through the edges, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing to me how much they're picking up when you think they're distracted too. That has shocked me. I remember, I think I was reading, I feel like it was Narnia. I was reading through Narnia to my kids, and my youngest son was 3 at the time. And he was just, so loud, so distracting, climbing over everything, like never just sitting there listening. So I, in my mind, assumed I was reading to the older boys and that he was just there. And one day he just started like narrating out the story, and I could not believe it. Like I truly was like, what is this? Because, never sitting still, never looking like he was paying attention. And it's just profoundly amazing to me how they can absorb and multitask. I wish I could do it.
Yeah, but it's funny. It can be a learning experience to try and listen to an audiobook yourself if you haven't done that in a while. Because I'm surprised when I'm listening to audiobooks, how often I realize I have no idea what's going on. It's like I thought I was paying attention, but I really wasn't, because I started making a list or thinking of something else, or and it has let me have more grace for my kids when they do that. And then also realizing it's not that big of a deal. Like you can keep reading, and they'll actually pick back up on it. Just like if they, run to the bathroom in the middle of a show, they seem to be able to figure out what's happening usually when they get back.
Yep. Well, we have, Elizabeth, do you have any questions for Sarah before we open it up for questions? I have a ton of questions that are coming in, but did you want to touch on anything with Sarah first?
I think I'm ready to take a look at, I saw the questions before we got started. I know we've got a lot, and I can tell down at the bottom here, a lot of people are kind of wanting to go questions. So I think we can go questions. I think that one thing that I hadn't told Sarah, I think I told you this, Stephanie, I may have mentioned it on one of our other Zooms, but something that I just kind of a full circle kind of thing for me, that at the very beginning of this whole, whatever we're calling this quarantine thing, there's like one of those rare mothering moments where you go, oh my gosh, this really mattered. Like this is a thing that I was very, very committed to. And this mattered to all of these kids. Like I can't ever think of any other time really that I had that kind of affirmation. So here's what happened. I have 5 grandchildren, all the same family. They're my eldest son's kids, and they live in Connecticut. And the oldest is a kindergartner who took a long time getting the reading thing going. Like it was a little bit of a struggle this year, and she's worked really hard. And so when the school closed, the first thought was, oh, we don't want to lose time. We don't want to, lose progress, and we want to keep Lucy going. And so her mom texted everybody in the family group chat and said, okay. And she's got, so the oldest is 5. There are 5 kids. The oldest is 5. So she's got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, a set of twins who just turned 2, and a newborn. So she's like, we need to read to Lucy, and I need help. So everybody pick a day or time or whatever, and you can FaceTime, and I need you to help me read aloud to Lucy. So when we're saying everybody in a group text, for us, that's it's the 9 kids my husband and I and Kristen. So it's a big group text, and everybody jumped in, even kids that I remember that when they were little being reluctant readers, or the ones that just never really seemed to be paying attention. But then what happened is two of the uncles aren't here right now. You know, they're away from the books and the libraries are closed. And they're like, well, wait, we want to read a Lucy, but like, I don't have a picture book. So then it became, okay, we have this ridiculous picture library at my house that I have clung to, you know, for my grandchildren, but basically I can't part with any of these books. And then they started saying, well, I get to read this one. Wait a minute, I heard the Little House picture books every night for like 18 months. And that's mine, I get to read that. And, you know, somebody's arguing about who gets to read Where the Wild Things Are. And it was ridiculously gratifying to watch these grown-up kids get excited and remember those picture books, because we really did picture books at our house. And it was just a really cool, they do remember, they do care, they do want to share those books. And all this time, and I did tell you this, we did 3 books a kid at bedtime. And so when you're putting 4 kids to bed at once and they're each got 3 books at bedtime, like I was in there a long time.
3 books
a lot
each
of time. Yep. I don't know. It was just a thing. And it was always never more than 4 kids, you know, because you figure you have a nursing baby and then you've got a toddler who's just picking 4 books. And they were not, you know, but that's what we did. And it was never like, it was always a thing, and bedtime took a long time, but like, look, it was never more than 12 books, right? You know, but that, first of all, I counted that as school time. You know, sure, it was bedtime. It was after dinner. It was after bath. It was late at night. But that, to me, if I'm investing that hour, an hour and a half, that counted as part of my school day for sure. And now I feel like in that one day of the group text and then the calls and the back and forth and who gets to read once, it's like everything I could ever ask for. Like, truly. This is worth it. This is worth the time. Invest this time, because you look back and it really is precious time. Even if somebody's crawling all over you, the baby's nursing, and you can't reach the page to turn it, like it's so, this is golden. So that's all I have to offer. Now let's just get Sarah to answer all the questions.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. All right, so let's get to some questions. Our first one is from Christina. She says, any tips for an uninterested 16-year-old son with a 3-year-old very active sister?
I guess it depends. I wouldn't try probably to read something that's going to introduce a 16-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. I'm not sure you're going to find something that hits that sweet spot. There's a couple of things. One might be to think about what your 16-year-old son liked when he was little. Jim Trilly says this in the Read-Aloud Handbook. He says that every child loves to read until they have to learn how to read, and then some of them don't learn love reading anymore. And so think back to before, when he was really young, what were his favorites? And one of the things you could do, especially right now while everybody's at home all the time together, is I'll put on each of my big kids' school lists that they're supposed to read aloud to the little kids for 10 minutes or 15 minutes every day, which is awesome, because then the little kids get read aloud to them, more than I can do. And then my older kids are getting, it's actually a developed skill really to read aloud well, and so the more they practice, the better they get at it. And it can help with all kinds of, public speaking and elocution and all kinds of those things. It ends up being really beneficial, but it's also just a really beautiful connection. And I'll listen to them, reading aloud and like giggling and sharing a story, or one of them will the little kids will run up with the book later to the bigger kid and be like, can we just read a little more, So that's really wonderful. If you could think of books that your older son loved as a child and then put it on his list, you have to read from this stack, and don't tell him what you did, just do it, right? Yeah. Just make the stack out of his favorites, just for 10 minutes a day. Then that could be a really beautiful way to connect them. There are a couple, and I'll recommend a couple if you have a wide age spread. There are a couple books that come to mind that are really good to be read aloud that can appeal to a wide age range. One is The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street by Karina Yang Glazer, and that's a novel, so it's longer. I think the sweet spot for that book is probably 7 to 12 or something, but I read it to all 6 of mine when they were, I think, like 17 down to 5 or maybe 16 down to 4. I can't remember which year it was. And it was a hit with everybody. So The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street. And then another one that we just read, I just read it to all 6 of mine, is called Adventures with Waffles. And a lot of that's going to be over your 3-year-old's head. But if any of you have a big wide age range, that is it's got to be my favorite read aloud. Elizabeth, have you read that?
I haven't, but I will start it tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's a great.
It caught me by surprise how much I loved it. So it was translated from Norwegian.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and it's just hilarious and touching. And anyway, so I read it to everybody, and it was really great because we had some people doing some work in our kitchen at the same time I was reading this book. So I have all 6 of my kids that I'm reading to, and then this guy who's in the kitchen doing some work under the sink, and I hear him like stop working, and then I would read something funny and he totally laughed. I'm like, I just love like picturing him going home at night like telling his wife, there's this book, we need to might read it, you know. Anyway, so Adventures with Waffles, and that was by Maria Parr. So those are 2 that come to mind if people have, wide age range. But
I love it. Okay, so Megan wants to know, how do you choose which books to read, by themes or by a child's interest? She has twin 7-year-olds, 5, 3, and 1, and she also would like advice on what to do about books if you don't have a tablet with all the libraries closed.
Yeah. Okay, so I choose books based on what I feel like reading and what I want to read and what my kids are interested in. So things like Elizabeth said, her kids picked 3 books a night. I would have each of my little ones pick 1. I do not have the fortitude to read 12 picture books at once every night. But that is, I liked having them pick 1, and then sometimes I would pick 1 too. So I might pick the books that they're never choosing, that are on the shelf that I really like, but they're not picking. Sometimes I'll tie read alouds into what we're learning in school. I do that less frequently than I think people think when they ask me. Mostly we just read things that are fun and interesting, that I hear someone say, you're going to love this book, and I don't worry if it ties into our history or if it ties into anything else we've been reading lately. I do sometimes. Right now I am. Like right now with 2 of my high schoolers, we just finished reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. We're listening to the audiobook, actually, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And we just started Jasper and the Riddle of Riley's Mind, and those both are happening at the same time in history that we're learning about, but that's kind of more unusual than it is. Usually I just kind of go by what sounds fun. With the kids, if we just read the Charlotte's Web and the kids loved it, I'll look for other books, I'll go to Amazon and see what other books people are reading after Charlotte's Web and pick something there that looks fun and get it from my library. So I don't think it's quite as, there's no like right book list that your kids need to read through before they leave home, So I think giving yourself a lot of freedom just to read things that come up is fine. And then, there is a lot of benefit in rereading. So if you don't have access, I have 2 ideas actually for if you don't, you don't have access to your library, you don't have access to ebooks. One is just to use this time to reread a lot of books that your kids love. There is some super interesting research that shows that kids, the vocabulary and language and writing benefits that kids get from reading comes more quickly from books that they've heard before. So if you were to read the same picture book over several different times over, a week, a month, a year, whatever, they're going to get more benefits from that than reading a different book all those different times. So that's kind of interesting. Also, they love it because then these books become their companions, right? And so I wouldn't hesitate in just rereading books, novels, doesn't really matter. Any books, picture books, novels that you've read before. Sometimes you'll get more out of the reread than you did the first time around. One interesting thing about rereading, I think, is that when we're reading a book the first time, our brain is trying to answer the question of what happens next. And so we miss a lot of the other little things that are in the story, beautiful language, turns of phrase, foreshadowing, all those fun things. So if you're rereading a book, you'll just notice automatically, like, oh my gosh, I missed that completely the first time through.
That's a great point.
Yeah, so it can be a really like really, especially a book that you really loved. Adventures with Waffles, I read to myself a couple months ago, and then immediately read it out loud to my kids. And I noticed that just reading it the second time, and this is, kids novel. I'm like, oh, I completely missed that little hint there, And then there was something else I wanted to say about, I had another idea. I was thinking today that if you don't have access to a library and you don't have access to ebooks, another really good way to expand your library would just be to do like a book swap with some friends. And, you could do this social distancing by like dropping a tote off on the front porch and like swapping it out, or something. And you could wipe the books down if you need to, or just, I think they say if they sit for a day or something, then they're fine. But then you could, we're going to give you 10 books and you give us 10 books and swap with a neighbor or another friend. That could be a really fun way to expand your reading options when you don't have access to a library.
Yep, we did that actually. My mom dropped off a whole ton of books. My mom is pretty much the library. She's like you, Sarah. She's both of my parents are bibliophiles, so we grew up, my family, literally every room in the house had bookshelves except bathrooms, and she has so many wonderful books. So when we knew we were going to be quarantined, I was like, Mom, I need more books. So I had, they showed up on the front porch and we just wiped them down, and then we were able to share some with a friend too by just doing a porch drop off. So I think that's a great idea. There's Lysol wipes if you need the Lysol wipes when they come in the house, right, for the books.
Yeah. That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So the next question is from Karina, and she said she'd like ideas on how to keep a reading log with a child who has dysgraphia. Did I say that right, Elizabeth? Dysgraphia?
Yep.
And she cannot keep up with the amount of books that her daughter gets and reads.
So dysgraphia, as in like struggling with writing. So I would say if you'd like your child to keep a reading log, or and there's a couple different reasons why you might want to do that, but just keeping track of what they've read or what you've read aloud to them. I wouldn't hesitate to do the writing for the child myself, no matter how old that child is, because what you want is that reading log to be like a keepsake or something that they love, right? That they're proud of it. These are like my books. These books belong to me. They all belong inside of me because I've read them all. So you don't want to just pile it on like another assignment, especially if your child is struggling with reading. I wouldn't use a reading log as one big giant writing assignment. That's going to make it just not appealing at all. So I wouldn't hesitate to then have the reading log, and then you either write them down for your child, or if you're wanting your child to remember something, one thing I like to do, I don't always do it, but one thing I like to do is say, just jot down one thing you don't want to forget about the book. So I'm not asking them for a specific thing, but just what's one thing, and then they'll start to get in the habit of reading books and thinking, oh, that's my thing. I'm going to remember that. Either it's a passage or it's a scene or something they loved. So you could write down the title of the book and the author and and the date or whatever you want to put in your reading log, and then ask them, what's one thing you don't want to forget about this book, and then just write it out for them as they're dictating it to you. My
Stephanie,
son,
can I
yeah.
How old was this child again, Stephanie?
She didn't tell me how old the child was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering, couldn't we use an app for that?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Goodreads or Story Online or
library.
Just even screenshot the titles.
Well, and I was thinking, yeah, you could let her take pictures of the titles and cut those pictures out and paste them. I don't know how old she is, but
Oh, she's 8. Oh, it's Karina.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be fun to let her take pictures and then assemble them herself too.
Mm-hmm.
Or even, it depends, depending on the child, if she'd like to record a little something of her, like a little video of herself saying, like, I just finished this book. I just finished Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, and something I don't want to forget is blank, and then assemble those.
That'd be very sweet.
Yeah. You'd love to watch those over and over like 10 years from now.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, next question is from Kristen, and we touched on this a little bit already, but she talked about her 7-year-old daughter, who she said is a huge bookworm and usually gets piles and piles of physical books from the library every single week. And with the library closed, she said her daughter is so distraught, and she's just looking for some encouragement and help for her daughter, who's used to those huge stacks of library books each week to devour. And what should she do?
Yeah, that's tricky, especially if she doesn't want to reread books, or if maybe she already has reread them if she's a voracious reader.
Mm.
So it might be. How old did she say?
She
Oh,
said
7.
7. She said she's advanced. She's an
Yeah.
advanced reader.
I would definitely see if you can talk with some friends, like trying that book swap thing with some local moms, maybe to friends, to see if you can swap out books. I
And
wouldn't
I,
hesitate to give a 7-year-old who's reading well at my Paperwhite to read, though. I mean, I love reading on my Paperwhite, but
right.
that doesn't make me love a book less. Like the physicality of a book.
Yeah.
Less. I
And
do
I
love.
think these are extraordinary times, and as much as we like to feel a book or smell a book, I mean, I am personally beginning to see the beauty of a Kindle, and from the perspective of somebody who publishes books. Amazon's not publishing books right now. They're making toilet paper, and that's their priority. And all I can say is, okay, well, I was staunchly against publishing ebooks, and now I'm not. And I love my Paperwhite too. I think no, I don't love it. I like my Paperwhite, and I appreciate it for what it is. And a lot of times I hate it because it's not a book, and I definitely prefer to turn pages. But if you have a kid who's a voracious reader and who just really wants to read right now, then I think if you could use the Kindle app, if you don't have a Kindle and can't get a Kindle, use the Kindle app. And if not, share your Kindle, because I just keep reading. And especially now, kids who are voracious readers right now, they need that escape. They need to be allowed to just read as much as they want to read. I really think that for sure.
Yep. Okay, we had a question come in from Jen. This is a great question. She said, Sarah, how do you pick books for your children when you do not have time to pre-read them yourself? You've got too many kids who are reading. Just to check books for appropriateness, how do you figure that out when you don't have time to pre-check them yourself?
Yeah, so as you get more and more familiar with authors, sometimes that helps, because then you can think like, oh yeah, we've read a lot by this author, so I feel pretty good about my child reading something else by this person. There's a couple websites I use though. So I generally don't until my kids are older. Once they're older teens, I don't do this anymore. But when we go to the library, which is not a thing right now, obviously, but when we would, they would bring home a stack of books, and if they were books I was unfamiliar with and they were required to put them next to my computer, and then I would just do real quick checks just to make sure there was nothing in there that I was going to be, not happy that they had stumbled upon. I would look at Common Sense Media, that website. I can't remember if it's .org or .com, but I would usually look there, not necessarily just to take their advice on whether my kid should read it, but on that website, they'll tell you, these are the possible violent things in here. These are the language issues. And they'll just bullet point list them out. This character says this word, and so I could kind of look at it and be like, yeah, I'm okay with that. And, hand it to them or not. That's Common Sense Media. redeemedreader.org.com, man, I don't know. Redeemed Reader is another website run by a bunch of Christian moms who are very good at reviewing books, and they do the same thing. They will give it a star rating and a recommendation or not, but they also will let you know exactly what is in the book that might be objectionable, and so that you can make your own decision. And then another thing is, so I don't give my kids like just carte blanche, they can read anything they want, but inevitably, if your kids are readers, they're going to read things that you're not super excited about them having read. That's just like how it's going to happen. That will happen at some point. And I think it's useful to remember that is the book then ends up being a doorway, an opportunity for you to have a conversation with your child that you might not have started. Maybe you didn't want to start it yet, but it's still an opportunity to talk with your kids about something that you probably need to have a conversation about at some point or another. So using it as an opportunity, and really that opportunity is something that maybe you wouldn't have broached yourself. It can be a real gift then, and say, okay, well, you have a conversation about what your family thinks or believes, or what's the problem with the author putting that thing in the book, or why do you think they did that? That's interesting. Having those kinds of conversations. It's really important, I think, to remember what we really want to do is raise discerning readers, because most of the reading our kids are going to do should happen after they leave home, right? Because they're only home with us for God willing, they're only home with us for about a quarter of their life, maybe less. So over 75% of the reading they do in their life should happen after they leave our home. And that means we want to raise kids who want to read so that they do that, right? But also that they're discerning readers, because most of their reading, you're not going to be there whispering over their shoulder saying, don't read that. You don't want to read that. So I think helping them learn to become discerning readers is one of the most important things we can do. And you kind of need to practice that when they're growing up on books that maybe have things in them that you weren't really excited about in the first place. So just kind of seeing them as, I don't want this to happen, but when it does, we have a strategy for dealing with it, can be a little less fraught.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of it from that angle before. That's really good. So let's see. Jackie said her 10-year-old daughter, what do you do with a 10-year-old daughter who loves to read but doesn't finish the book? She gets too excited to go on to something else and never finishes the book.
Is she an extrovert? I'm curious if you think she's an extrovert.
Hi, Sarah.
Because I have this problem too. Okay, so there's a couple of things that yes, 100%.
100%.
She's just so, I mean, I can really relate to this. There is something really exciting and wonderful about starting something new. I'm also the kind of reader, and I'd be curious to know if she's like this. In a series, I'll read like the first couple, and then I'm so done. I'm ready for something new. So I would, very rarely will read the entire series of a book because I'm kind of ready for something else. One of the things that I think has helped my child extrovert who has this same issue is that I will say, okay, when you're done with that book, I can't wait to hear about it. So, and we can't really do this necessarily in this way right now, but I'll say, let me know when you finish that book, and then we'll go out for a milkshake and talk about it. And you're really just, what you want to do is you want to give them practice finishing books and like feeling how satisfied and wonderful it feels to finish a book. But you don't want to tell them that, because that won't work. So you want them to get that experience themselves. So kind of giving them kind of you can do this at home. You can't go out to milkshakes maybe, but you can make a milkshake at home together, or we'll make cookies and talk about it. I want to hear all about that book. I haven't read it, but I want to hear you tell me about it. Kind of gives them this incentive to finish it on their own. And the more they get that endorphin release of finishing a book and what that feels like, satisfying to finish a book, I think the more than they get in the habit. We tend to do things that it's like habits, right? So if she's in the habit of ditching books, then it's easier to ditch a book than it is to finish it. So you just want to kind of flip that as organically and sneakily as you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
And also, if I can say one more thing about that,
sure.
is we all have taste, and I think it's really important to remember that our kids are going to have different reading tastes than we do. Especially in the homeschooling world, I do think there's this tendency to think there's like the right books to read. Like everybody should love, let's go back to The Wind in the Willows, which I'm sure you can tell by now that is not one of my favorite books. And it's not going to happen. Not everybody's going to love that book, because we all have different tastes. Like God made us that way, right? It's beautiful that we all have different taste and interests and things that light us up. And so I think giving our kids the freedom to have taste is really important. That's what real readers do. If you think about the adult readers that who read voraciously, they probably have reading taste, like books that they say, that is my kind of book and this one's not. That's one of the things we want to help our kids figure out about themselves as they're growing. And so giving them the freedom, I always tell my kids they can stop reading a book after 25% if they hate it, because that is giving them enough time to to get wrapped up in the book, not to get in the habit of just starting and quitting. But also, if you make your kids finish every book they start, they're going to be less willing to take a chance on a book they don't know they're going to love, because that feels like a big commitment, right? Like if someone handed you Anna Karenina and said, you have to read this thing and you can't quit no matter what, it's, you get a book that's big. I mean, to a kid, a book like that might feel that way, right? So it feels like this daunting task, and they're just going to be less likely to be willing to just pick up a book and see if they like it, if they don't have the opportunity to be able to ditch it.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, let's see. Wendy says she has a teenage girl who refuses to read, hates to read, would rather be grounded than told to read. What should she do?
I'm curious, and I don't know if Wendy's watching. I'm curious. Okay.
There's Wendy.
So can we ask you, Wendy, have you tried audiobooks with her, letting her do audiobooks. Oh dear. So that doesn't work either. The other thing I would say is graphic novels. Might be a hook to get in there. And then because she's older, maybe for a while, think about nonfiction, and an interest, like something that, like, what does she care about? What is she really interested in? What does she do for fun? And can you interest her in some nonfiction books, depending on what that hobby is, that might at least start the thing going. She likes Egyptian mythology. Okay. So would she read books about Egyptian mythology? And then if she likes Egyptian mythology, have you tried Rick Riordan? Because I'm wondering, King Chronicles. Okay. So can we riff on that a little, Sarah?
Yeah. I'm just thinking, I was going to ask you a follow-up question, Wendy, and it went out of my head. Let's see. You said you've tried audiobooks, Egyptian mythology. Does she like movies? I'm just going to wait for you to answer that. Yes. Okay. So then we know she loves stories. So that's a good start. So one thing that I think is important for us to remember is that stories and reading are like, we think of them as the same thing. They're not the same thing, right? Stories come to us in people talking to us, like me telling you how my trip to the grocery store went, right? Or they come on the page when you're reading. And then of course that comes in a whole bunch of different forms, like fiction novel or poetry or a graphic novel or a haiku poem or something, or a picture book, right? Or they come through TV and movies, but the love of story comes first. And it always seems to me like a really good sign when a child loves movies or loves TVs if the parent says they don't love reading, because then you know that the child loves stories. That's the heart. So now we just need to, one thing is we just want to get them used to receiving those stories in a different mode. So she's probably really visual. Do you think she's a visual learner?
We're waiting to see.
Because I do think yes, you do.
Yes.
Okay, so that makes sense to me then, right? Because if she's watching a movie, then she's getting the story visually. So one thing that's important is to realize that some kids are going to just not love books and reading, the actual act of reading, as much as others. Just like we said, everybody has different taste, right? God makes us all different.
And
so
there, I would ask,
Wendy,
are we sure? Are we sure that there isn't a reason she doesn't like that actual physical act of reading? Like, is it hard? Like, have we ruled out, because she's old enough, have we ruled out any kind of learning disability that would make it hard to really process the print? Particularly if she's visual, like, is that connection happening? Because she has ADD. All right, so we're working with attention deficit and maybe the words jumping around a little bit because she loses her place, loses her attention.
Did you say you've tried, Wendy, did you say you've tried graphic novels? Or maybe I don't know if Elizabeth asked you that outright. But graphic novels can be really, really good for kids who are visual and who aren't don't say they don't love reading, because there's not that much text on the page. It's a lot less intimidating. Dr. Michael Gurian came on the Read-Aloud Revival podcast at one point and said this is why a lot of boys in particular like graphic novels, because they tend to be more visually oriented. Not always, but. And so it's just less intimidating. And then you've got that visual component. And then actually, we've done a little research on graphic novels at Read-Aloud Revival because so many kids love them. And we're like, what is going on there? And it turns out they require a different part of your brain than just reading text. So when they've done these studies of kids, or adults even, reading text and then reading a graphic novel, they'll see different parts of the brain are lighting up, like more parts of the brain are lighting up when they're reading a graphic novel. And the reason why is it's like multimodal. You have to take that story in through the images and through the words and actually through the panels, because the way the panels are organized kind of tells part of the story too. It's a lot going on. So we tend to think of like, oh, comics, they're not as, meaty as a novel, but actually there's a lot going on there when they're reading a graphic novel.
And that means that a kid who's ADD, there's enough there to bounce from one thing to another. Like, it's not a detriment necessarily to not be able to focus just on the print and the page in the orderly manner. A graphic novel actually plays to that and makes it a strength. My kids who struggle with reading, particularly the ones who have ADD as well, are huge proponents of graphic novels. Like that's their thing.
You said you gave her the Hunger Games. Does she like it? There's a couple others. I was just looking at my list of graphic novels because I couldn't remember which ones they were called. There's one, you said she's a teen, right? So The Faithful Spy she's 13. Okay. The Faithful Spy by John Hendricks is excellent. I don't know if I'd go too much younger than 13 for that one. But the graphic novels by Ben Hatke, Mighty Jack series, they're excellent. And they're page turners, really. They're kind of a retelling of Jack and the Beanstalk, but that doesn't matter. They're completely retold. Oh, Hugo Cabret. That's a great recommendation, Stacy. Yes, even your older kids like Ben Hatke. Yeah, I agree. That's good.
Sarah, Mimi asked a question. She said that she homeschools, her kids love reading so much that she'll find them reading when they're supposed to be doing their schoolwork, reading when they're supposed to be doing their chores. And so sometimes she has to forbid reading for the rest of the day or the following day. She wants to know if that's a good idea or if that's not handling it well.
Sometimes I can be found reading when I'm supposed to be doing my chores too.
Oh, I totally did this growing up. The math homework with Nancy Drew right under in case mom came in the room.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. I have one of those kids who would read every minute of the day like she wouldn't breathe or go to the bathroom or ever go outside if I didn't make her. So I don't like the idea of banning, like taking away her books or banning reading, but what I will do is I will make pockets of time during the day where she's just supposed to do anything else. So basically reading is not an option, right? So it might be like, you can figure out your own day, but like from 2 to 4, you just can't read. And the reason is because I want her to, I want her to play games with her siblings. I want her to go outside and like go on a walk or ride her bike or whatever. And so I do think there can always be too much of a good thing. I try and walk a kind of a delicate walk there because, as soon as you take something away, it doesn't make your child want it any less. So I don't necessarily take it away completely, but I'll make pockets of time. The other thing is my kids like to say, if I say, you better not be reading up there because they're supposed to be doing their schoolwork or their chores. They're like, you can't say that. You're the Read-Aloud Revival. Like we're going to keep it me right now.
I do. I
Go
do
ahead.
love to be able to say yes, though. Like I have a couple who would happily stay up and read all night, and I love it when I can do that. Like when I can say, "Yeah, if you want to read that book until 2:00 in the morning, I won't wake you." Like that's the beauty of homeschooling, and I've had them tell me that before too. Like, Mom, you said the whole reason you wanted to homeschool was so we could stay up all night and read a book, and everyone. I have said that, and they will never forget that. But every once in a while, I love to be able to get to that yes, and notice that a kid is really into a book and say, hey, Caroline, if you want to stay up and finish that book, go ahead, stay. Like when the last Pender books came out.
Oh yeah.
I think we got it in the mail like 4, and she had to wait till after dinner, and then I knew where this was going. She wasn't going to put that book down until the book was finished. It was going to be an all-nighter. But to say, all right, I'll clear the decks tomorrow. You don't have to do, you don't have to get up early, and we're going to let you have a lazy day, because if you want to stay up all night and read, you can. And I just think that's the greatest thing, like to be able to have the freedom to do that. And frankly, right now, in this world that we're in right now, that is an opportunity afforded to almost everybody. You can make that happen for a kid, and just say, okay, tonight's all night reading, like stay up as late as you want, read. Tell me about it tomorrow.
That's fun. I like that.
And that's what they'll remember. 20 years from now, that's the memory they'll have.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, we are running out of time. We're just at about an hour, so we're going to wrap up here. But Sarah, I wanted to ask you I felt like I had to ask you this week to talk to us a little bit about Tommy, because I know you had such a special relationship with him. You love his books. We love his books. Elizabeth loves his books. And maybe just give just a minute or two tribute to him, or, tell us a story about him to leave us with for the night.
Tommy was so joyful. I'll tell you, when I asked to interview him for Read-Aloud Revival, which is how we met, because I wanted to do a video interview just like this for our community at Read-Aloud Revival. And when we did the interview, he was it's effervescent, just joy radiates from that man. And afterwards, I just thought that was the best interview ever. I mean, I had so much fun. Well, I got an email from his assistant the next morning saying, I don't know what you did to Tommy during that hour, but he was so excited after having that conversation with you that he was like on a high all evening, giggling and laughing and having a great time. I thought that was so funny. So then the next year, I invited him back to do it again, and the same thing happened. Oh, that first year he had said, Sarah, you should come out and visit me. But I thought, this is like bubbly, wonderful, joyful, extroverted Tommy, so he doesn't mean it, right? So like a year later, he said, well, why haven't you come out to visit me yet? And I thought, like, okay, I'm totally going. I'm going to go then. And so I did. I took my two daughters, my two oldest teenage daughters, with me to New Hampshire, and we went to his studio and went out to dinner. And he is exactly like you would imagine the Stregonona books or any of his books to be incarnate, like made into flesh and a human being, because that is what it felt like. I felt like I was walking around with the books. He's just a light, and I am so heartbroken that he's gone. He wasn't quite ready. He wanted a couple more years. I know that when he went in for this last surgery, he took a fall last week, and when he went in for surgery because they found a blood clot in his head, they told him the risks, and he said he just wanted 2 more years to work. And I don't know how many 85-year-olds want 2 more years to work, but I 100% believe that Tommy wanted 2 more years to just make the best books yet for kids. And I'm really grateful for all the beautiful books that he's left with us. I think someone asked about my candle, and yes, that is right behind me there. There is this place, let me grab it, in I think it's in New Hampshire. I'm trying to remember because it's like I think it's in New Hampshire. It's called Markland Candle, and they make, can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
They make like church candles, and this is a Tommy hack right here. It's like a pretend one. He told me to do this. I told him I couldn't bear the thought of burning this candle, and so he told me burn a candle until your tea light, has like formed an imprint, and then get a plastic one and put it in there. So the funny thing is that if in his house, he has lots of these fake candles, and when he turns them off, they're all on a remote, and he would blow the remote. So he would go, hilarious. So anyway, yes, Markland Candle, they make these candles with his, his art on them, and they also make Christmas ornaments out of wax with his art on them too.
Oh my goodness, I love it.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, thank you for sharing about him. When I think of him, Sarah, after all the podcasts and blogs I've read from you, when I think of Tommy, I think of you now. So thought about you a lot this week, but thank you for sharing that memory with us. And thank you for being here, Sarah. Thank you for taking this whole hour to just spend some time with us. It's good for all of us isolated moms to be able to come together on a night like this and just have some fellowship, and so fun. I know you have a lot of fans here because the first 20 minutes of the chat was all fangirl. I'm a fangirl too.
Oh, thank you
for
inviting me. This has been so fun, and we need it. Like, especially those of us who are extroverts are really struggling with this whole being isolated at home bit. I mean, we all are, I know, but I want a little extra compassion for being an extrovert and having to be home with my children all the time.
So where are the best places for everyone listening to the recording to find you and your book, Sarah? Where should we send everybody?
So readaloudrevival.com is really the home base for everything. We've got book lists, book recommendations. That's also where you'll find the quiz that you can take. Tell us, how old your kids are, what kind of book you're interested in, and if you want a long one or a short one, and I'll give you a recommendation. And the podcast, everything is right there at readaloudrevival.com. On social media, my favorite place is Instagram, and I'm just Read Aloud Revival there.
Perfect. All right. And if you want to check out Elizabeth's blog too, she has wonderful, wonderful posts about so many resources, including wonderful book titles as well. She is, her blog is elizabethfoss.com, and she's on Instagram at elizabethfoss too. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Elizabeth, for setting us up tonight for this wonderful topic.
So glad.
And we hope to see you all on Saturday morning. Elizabeth and I are going to do a coffee chat Saturday morning at 10 a.m. And our special guest is Kendra Tierney. We're going to talk with her about how to do Holy Week and Easter week at home and what that can look like, some tips and traditions and things that we can do as moms to make this special for our families and memorable for our families during a really, really tough time. So please feel welcome to join us there. The registration link for that Zoom is on Elizabeth's Instagram at Elizabeth Foss and my Instagram at Stephanie Weinert. So please sign up for that. We'd love to see you. Come in your pajamas, come with your coffee, and hang out with us Saturday morning. All right. God bless you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Take care, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.